Welcome back to Paris Lesbos. One of us is a pixie, the other gets called Rena. Today, we've a woman who was mentioned in the last episode. If you're familiar with the world of dance in the early 20th century, or the story of her senseless death, you've probably also heard of her. It's Isadora Duncan. She arrived on the Paris scene in 1900 like a glorious bouncing Minerva, according to Janet Flanner. But Isadora started in San Francisco, where she was born on May 26, 1877, as Angela Isadora Duncan.
Angela? Why did she let that one go?
She didn't want to be known by her first name.
Beautiful one, but fair enough, I guess. Do we know anything else about her childhood?
We know from her own writing that she said she was born under the star of Aphrodite as a child of wind and wave and the winged flight of bird and bee. The reality is she was the descendant of pioneers who came west before the American Civil War as part of the California Gold Rush. However, they took the rich person's route of going to California by sea instead of prairie wagon.
No Oregon Trail for them.
Not surprising, seeing how her maternal grandfather had been thrice elected to the California state legislature. Isadora's father, meanwhile, suffered fires, failed business ventures, and just all-around bad luck from his first marriage back east, through marrying her mother when he was 50, and her mother was almost 21 at the time. So Isadora had 4 half-siblings and 3 full siblings. Then her parents got divorced in about 1880, a great scandal after he was on trial for forgery and perjuring himself in a trial, in addition to cheating on her mother.
Wow, sounds like a great guy.
Unfortunately, we don't know the exact date of Isadora's parents' divorce because of the San Francisco earthquake destroying the records.
Wow, so shrouded in mystery like many of the women in this podcast.
According to Isadora's account, her father did not have much to do with them after this. She once told a tale of a strange man appearing on the doorstep looking for her mother. When he realized who Isadora was, he introduced himself as her father, which got her excited, but the rest of the family demanded he leave. Side note, this is the same man who married the sister of the wife of one of his own sons, so perhaps not the best influence all told from a parent's perspective. That said, by the time Isadora was a teenager, she had concluded that marriage was not a good proposition. For Isadora herself, she was already listed as a dance instructor in the city directory at age 15 in 1892, after an eclectic and incomplete education in dancing throughout her childhood and early adolescence. The next year, she and 3 of her siblings went on a dance tour of California, though it was more of a variety act as it also had singing, poetry, snippets of Shakespeare, and burlesque mixed in.
Burlesque? At 16?
It was a different time. However, in 1895, Isadora left California for Chicago. While there, she had an audition with Augustin Daly, a Broadway producer, which led to the next leap of her career. He hired her, and for a time, she toured with them and appeared in various productions, including the works of Shakespeare. Within a year or 2, it became apparent it wasn't a good fit, and she quit in order to return to solo performance. That said, Isadora did undergo additional dance training and took her first trip to England in 1897 with the group, though these are omitted from her autobiography. This might be because the training was in ballet, which she did not think much of.
Yeah, it sounds like mixed feelings all around. The company gives her a higher profile but less control over what she's doing.
The trade-off of any creative even today. After leaving Daly's company, Isadora wound up under the patronage of the Mrs. Astor in Newport. The name will ring a bell for those who are fans of the show The Gilded Age. For everyone else, the short version is that Mrs. Astor was the social ringleader of old money New York at the time. Or as Isadora wrote, Mrs. Astor represented to America what a queen did to England. For her, Isadora was giving private dance performances at afternoon gatherings, but by 1899, she, along with some of her siblings, left for Europe. In London, the dances at private gatherings continued. Sometimes these were for charities, which might even see the future King Edward VII put in an appearance. To be clear, there's nothing shady going on at these. It's just rich people giving patronage to artists like they did for hundreds of years before.
So this is not a burlesque situation.
No, this is a dancing in Greek tunics situation. For you see, it's also in London that Isadora starts thinking about the ancient Greeks. She could see their statues and the depictions on pottery in museums, and she started thinking that the Greeks understood that dance is about rhythm and therefore the form and design does not matter. The image we have of Isadora Duncan in Grecian-style robe starts here. In the summer of 1900, she left London and arrived in Paris at the age of 23. Isadora found several patrons in the city, including Winnaretta Singer, who showed up unannounced at her doorstep and asked her to come dance at her salon before leaving 2,000 francs at the door when she left. She also attended at least one party at the American Embassy dressed as Cleopatra. Isadora's fame only increased further as rumors abounded about her dancing nude. In reality, it was only her chest that was uncovered.
Only.
It's also reported that she lifted her tunic to reveal she wasn't wearing underwear when Natalie Barney attended a performance with her mother. As Isadora once said, her dancing is for the elite, for the artists, sculptors, painters, musicians, but not for the general public.
So, for people who didn't expect nudity in dance to have burlesque connotations, in other words.
Or just people who really didn't expect nudity of any kind.
But it's artistic nudity is what she's saying. It's not for the scandal.
Oh, definitely. It is at this time in 1902 that Isadora begins a relationship with the man who would one day be the most famous actor in Hungary. Apologies in advance if I butcher this man's name. I am currently suffering from allergies. They're messing with my throat.
I mean, I'm also allergic to Hungarian words, but carry on.
That man is Oskar Baregi. She was on tour at the time through Central Europe and spent quite a bit of it in Budapest, which is how they met. There were rumors she was pregnant several months later. In her autobiography, she mentions being ill when she reached Vienna and spending time in a clinic. It is very likely that Isadora was pregnant and that she suffered a miscarriage after a fall. As to why she omitted these from her autobiography, it might just have been too painful or slipped through the cracks since her mental health took a sharp decline afterwards. She is described as being in a stupor, so I think it's safe to say she suffered depression soon after the miscarriage, especially as the relationship broke up soon as well.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty intense time.
While dancing and a return to France did improve her health, Isadora did not stay long after the humiliation of a French bailiff arriving at dinner in her hotel suite to collect an unpaid debt. Instead, she went to Greece in 1903. She and her siblings tried their hands at amateur archaeology for a few months. Thankfully, it sounds like they were far less destructive than actual archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann was at the site that gets called Troy. This did not last long, as Isadora's manager wanted her back to touring Europe. It is on the next tour that Isadora met Gordon Craig, a stage designer who was already married, possibly with 2 wives in 2 separate countries.
You say possibly.
I cannot be 100% sure that he was in fact committing bigamy, but there is at least one biographer who thought so.
Certainly has one wife that Isadora doesn't mind.
That did not stop her from having a relationship with him. More importantly, though, she starts a school with her sister in Germany not long after the tour. It was both a dance school and a regular school because the students still had to study history, math, science, literature, and so on, alongside music and, of course, dancing. The actual academics were taught by state-certified teachers and not the Duncans.
Wow. I feel like it's so rare on this podcast to hear about people getting an actual education, like with certified teachers. It seems like Isadora is really trying to remedy the education situation.
I get the feeling Isadora didn't want to teach science to students.
But she knew that they needed to learn science.
This is true because she was clear that she wanted the students to actually learn and be aware before they even started dance. In time, the students would perform on stage in multiple countries, including Russia, Finland, and France. Isadora's relationship with Craig, meanwhile, had some bumps, like her finding a letter from his common law wife in England about the birth of her son, his 8th child. Wanting a child of her own, Isadora was briefly shocked, though I do need to point out that she was aware of the woman in England, as that hadn't been hidden from her. The news about the child led to several fights, but she stayed with him and had their daughter at the end of September. Odd for her time, she wasn't itching to marry him, but considering what we discussed earlier about her father and her conclusions on marriage when a teenager, it's not surprising.
I mean, also, it seems like with this guy, marriage does not mean a whole lot.
True, but it also did not stop rumors from saying Isadora was about to marry Craig as she waited for the child's due date. Meanwhile, Isadora was summoned to a German court after she told a bailiff to get out of her house when he delivered the papers of a dismissed teacher who was suing the school.
Oh, so I guess there are some problems with the school.
Well, many in Berlin disapproved of her dancing and teaching children in that same style of dancing. There was a bit of back and forth bans and lifting of bans on children dancing on stages as a result. In the meantime, Isadora's daughter did not have an actual name for the first 18 months of her existence. They called her a nickname, Snowdrop, before finally settling on Deidre. Also, only a few months after the birth, Isadora and Craig took her to Florence with them, where they ended up working on a project with the actress Eleanor Duse. While acting as interpreter between the two who shared no common language, Isadora ended up somewhat friends with Eleonora, enough that in a time of deep depression and tragedy, Eleonora would be the one to help her. But that's in the future. In 1907, as she turned 30, Isadora's relationship with Craig ended. They maintained a correspondence, though, as they did share a daughter. However, by the sounds of it, custody really just stayed with Isadora. Then in 1909, she met Paris Singer, the almost youngest child out of 24 by Isaac Singer of Sewing Machine Fortune. She did not marry him either, even when he kept asking. Like Craig, Singer was married when they met, as he would not get divorced till 1918. It would be her longest and most tumultuous relationship. From him, she had her second child in May 1910, a boy named Patrick. Throughout all of this, Isadora continued to dance, tour, and sometimes argue with her sister over whose school exactly it was in Germany.
Was her sister more involved with the school than she was?
I suspect she was because Isadora spent so much time on tour.
Yeah, you don't really hear about the other Duncan siblings as famous dancers in the same way that you hear about Isadora.
All in all, it was a good life until 1913. Her children and their nurse were traveling by car when it suffered engine trouble. The chauffeur got out to deal with it, and the car started going backwards down a grassy embankment and into the river. The driver did not reach the car in time to prevent it, as he ended up falling over during the run after it. Now, I do not know modern cars, let alone old ones, so I can't tell you why the nurse couldn't get the door open during this. I can only say that she didn't before the vehicle ended up in the river. Some hours later, her body and those of the children who clung to her as they died were retrieved and taken to a hospital. They were only 7 and 3 years old. After she was told, Isadora is described as almost being in a trance, as she gave others instructions for where to take the bodies and so forth. She got through the funeral somehow, despite not sleeping or changing her clothes for 3 days. At one point, doctors tried to give her sedatives, but She refused. Surprisingly, the press were actually delicate in their reporting, as they avoided mentioning the scandalous fact that her children were illegitimate. Initially, Isadora tried to lose herself in Greece in order to recover. Soon, she found herself in Italy with Eleanor Duse, whom Isadora later credited with saving her life. There was a great deal of walking on the beach that followed. I also recall there being rumors that Eleanor and Isadora had an affair. The biography of Isadora I found does not mention such at all. What it does mention is that she met the sculptor Romano Romanelli, who becomes her lover, and that Isadora is pregnant 8 months after her children's deaths, much to the horror of Eleanor, who could not understand Isadora's reasoning that this new child could be a mixed reincarnation of the two she'd lost.
I mean, it sounds like she's been pretty affected by the grief, so I am not sure that she is in a place to be rationally thinking about these things.
I very much doubt she's fully thinking rationally about any of this at the moment, because 8 months is not a long time. And so we come to World War I.
As if she didn't have enough problems.
The boy was born just as Paris was mobilizing for war. Literally, the doctor got his notice to join the army a few hours before Isadora went into labor. To compound misfortunes, the unnamed boy only lived a few hours. His lungs would not expand correctly and his lips turned blue quickly. Isadora would later say, "I reached the height of any suffering that can come to me on earth."
I mean, yeah, especially if she had this idea in her mind that this was the reincarnation of her two dead children.
Yeah, she talks about looking down at the newborn and trying to figure out which of her dead children it is. After this, it is said her dancing changed when she started again in 1915. It echoed the loss of her children and the mass slaughter occurring throughout the world. Of course, by now she did not have the school in Germany. Due to the war, many of the pupils had been relocated to the US as teenagers. By the end of the war, Isadora celebrated the Russian Revolution as her relationship with Paris singer ended. In fact, the US government would investigate her for communist sympathies in 1917.
Seriously, she's out here dating singers. Does she really believe in the communist cause?
She was always very left-leaning and was happy when the Romanov monarchy fell, though she may not have been aware that they were murdered.
Yeah, from what I've read, the news about the Romanovs' execution was kind of muddled at the time, and a lot of people only heard rumors here and there and didn't actually know what had really happened.
Yeah, so in short, she was sympathetic and would later denounce any capitalistic endeavors the Soviet government debated doing. In 1921, she was invited to dance in Soviet Russia. Isadora agreed just as famine was spreading in Russia. She had been under the impression that the Soviets did a great deal to help artists, yet as we will eventually see, sometimes they censored and buried poets instead.
She was buying the propaganda.
To be fair, at one point she was promised 1,000 children to teach and one of Nicholas II's former palaces for a school building. I do not know why anyone would believe such a promise. She did temporarily have a school, but no more than 50 children, which made her gloomy. That said, by the sounds of it, she had a better time than many in Soviet Russia.
Yeah, I mean, hey, at least she's not starving.
It is also in Russia that Isadora breaks her rule of no marriage in order to marry Sergei Esenin, a poet who is 15 years her junior. It was not a good marriage. It was also not a good tour back through Europe and the US for the 15 months after the wedding. Isadora then left him and Russia in 1924. When asked later about her husband, she said, "There's no real marriage in Soviet Russia. Consequently, I am not divorced now." Unfortunately for her, the legal documents say otherwise, and if her statement had been true, the famous actress Alla Nazimova would not have had to go get a divorce from her Russian husband years after their marriage in Soviet Russia. For Isadora, she went back to France and started writing her memoirs. At the end of 1925, she heard her husband had committed suicide back in Russia. She acknowledged that she was legally his wife and sole heir by Russian law, but she stated she wanted his whole estate to go to his mother and sisters. Isadora, meanwhile, continued with her various lovers, her book, and her dancing, but with a slight twist, as her newest lover was Mercedes D'Acosta, who has been described as looking like Dracula.
I love it. And whom we have mentioned on this podcast before because she was a friend and lover of many other sapphics of her era.
The book then came out in 1927, but as with many of our women, Isadora was having money problems, running up debt. The advance from the sales helped with this, and there was a filmmaker hoping to record her dances on camera when she set off for Nice. Isadora refused to go by train, so a car and driver were rented with a post-dated check. She gets to Nice perfectly fine, by the way, but it is in another car not long after that the Grim Reaper gets her. Isadora sat in the back while wearing a long shawl. Someone noticed it was already caught in the left wheel well of the car and screamed for her to pick up her shawl, but the car started, roared off, and at the first sharp twist of the wheel, Isadora's neck snapped before she could utter a sound. At least it was a quick death, for the force of the shawl wrapped around the wheel dragged her body back out of the car and into the road, where her head got trapped between the underside of the car and the wheel. Her body was further dragged about 20 meters before the car stopped. And so Isadora died on September 14th, 1927, at the age of 50. Her body was cremated in Paris a few days later, and the ashes were interred in the columbarium below her children's. As she herself once said, "No flower of art ever fully bloomed, save it was nourished by tears of agony." In Isadora's case, it bloomed into being called the mother of modern dance, not just in Russia, but throughout the world. More famous people would sprout up to take the dance movement through the rest of the century, but it does start with her and her Grecian robes. Thank you for listening. You can find us pretty much anywhere you find podcasts, be it YouTube, Apple Podcasts, our own website. Leave a comment for who you might want to see next. And remember, if cars hate you this much, give in to eccentricity and insist on a carriage.